And welcome to the Community Principle. My name is Joe Carter, and tonight's topic is how technology affects our human social systems. Our guest tonight is Benny Millares. He's an entrepreneur, and we're going to introduce the topic. I'm going to sort of read a little bit of something here to get us kind of grounded in what we're going to tackle a little bit later. So there was an article on July 27th of 2015 in the Indiana Times that identified a factory in China that is automated to the point where all the processes are operated by computer-controlled robots, numerical control machining equipment, unmanned transport trucks, all the way out to automated warehouse equipment. And it only has a small technical staff that monitors the entire production process. So we're here to talk about things like that, the increasingly efficient automated production of goods, services, and information, and what that means to our human social systems. We've historically been mandated by necessity to sort of hunt and gather in one form or another. In other words, to address our basic human needs, we had to do some kind of work, but our social systems, including economics and all of that, have become tied to that whole hunter-gatherer thing over the years, and the mandatory need to do that hunting and gathering is now being diminished by technology. It's taking over the tasks in those basic areas. So in essence, we're beginning to reach a threshold where work is no longer a necessary element for more and more people. And we're here to kind of talk about what we can do to anticipate and perhaps navigate that future with some kind of a logic. So in a recent episode of Jeopardy, there was that computer named Watson, which is artificially intelligent. It also answered the questions in real time. Those sorts of real world problems are also on the horizon. So it's not just production, it's that. Neither Benny nor I are particularly qualified as experts on the topic of technology, but we share a hope and a desire for the success of and well-being of the world. So we think the topic is important. We want to spark some discussion. I guess Benny, we should probably start out with what are some of the broad areas we see technology having a significant foothold in making that transforming pressure on social systems in the world. Do you have any ideas on that?
I think technology is having an incredible transformational effect across all aspects of society. Whether it be how we produce things, how we market things, how we consume information, and to a certain respect, I would say even how we reason. I mean, it's affecting us in ways that we probably are not even able to appreciate yet. But going back to the article that you mentioned earlier, one of the immediate effects that we're going to see from this new technological revolution is automation and displacement of human labor, basically rendering human labor to a certain degree either taking all of the value out, taking a significant amount of the value out of it, where humans will be making a lot less than they are now.
Because by making a lot less, do you mean just in terms of production, or do you mean in terms of money, or what is?
In terms of income, right? In terms of money. I mean, everything is a calculus based on how much can our entire culture, and perhaps even human existence, is all we're always trying to optimize. We want to be able to make things faster, cheaper, better, more lucrative, and so on, right? So every single industry is engaged in some sort of optimization or another. When it comes to manufacturing, automation comes in and is able to allows us to produce goods cheaper, faster, much more reliably. Machines work 24 hours a day. They're very, very precise in the operations that they do. They're very predictable. And this is something that is not new, in the sense that we've been using robots in automotive manufacturing for a while now. With the Industrial Revolution, we've been using machines to do what we used to do either with human or animal labor.
Yeah, and they were kind of forebears of what you and I are talking about tonight, I think, in terms of, for instance, the automated loom. There were that created a real disruptive sort of social effect. The printing press, putting writing in the hands of a whole bunch more people than formerly had it, and certainly our social systems had to endure the swallowing of that technological egg and transform itself. So is that the kind of thing you're indicating here, that we're about to swallow some other pretty big and significant eggs that are going to transform our social systems in significant ways?
Yes, and I would say that there is, in fact, the whole idea that automation is going to have a negative impact on the labor force. There are a lot of people who have come out and had rebuttals to this, pointing out that we went through the Industrial Revolution, and even though many jobs went away, many more jobs were created. The cotton gin was created, and many people, particularly replaced the human labor, picking and processing cotton and so on, which is a particularly terrible industry. But other jobs were created thanks to that type of mechanical automation and so on. But this is different, and I think that it's different in the sense that this is the first time we're at a point where we're about to start creating machines that can create machines that can optimize on their own the task at hand, and that changes everything, because it's when this were just simple machines that require a lot of human intervention to design, maintain, upgrade, and so on. The human labor component was still present. It was simply a shift between repetitive mechanical tasks to more intellectual, technological type of jobs that were created. But if you look into what's happening in the area of artificial intelligence or machine learning, vector machines, neural networks, all that other nice stuff that they're working on, and the advances in robotics and miniaturization, and how inexpensive this is, they are to produce and so on. I think that's a real game changer. I don't think there's anything that we can look back in history there will be a really good analogy to what's about to take place. And I think it has very significant implications for society as a whole, including our value system and so on.
Yeah, do you hear a buzz about this in a broad enough cultural set that you feel like people are addressing this issue? I get the sense personally that we're kind of missing the boat in terms of the sense of urgency we should be giving that fact that the machines are going to exponentially become such that they put us out of work. And our old paradigm of seeing our sense of value and all of that predicated on a work, a hunter-gatherer is what I call it, for lack of a better term, with some iteration, some future iteration of that, is where we currently stand, where you have to grow up and find some way to earn a living, and then you do that, and the winners are the smart people and or sometimes the lucky ones and all of that. But this seems like a game changer to even that kind of a model, where it's no longer going to be possible to go out and do that. So the big question, I think, that is the elephant in the room is, how do we as human beings define fulfillment and our presence here on Earth in a meaningful way, in light of the fact that we're kind of working ourselves out of a job? I mean, I see information industry, the industry with Watson being able to answer questions naturally in real time and give answers. I can't imagine that somebody isn't going to soon realize that you could do that and replicate it, a more accurate doctor of the future based on symptoms and examinations and tests and all of that. That whole process could be all automated. We're automating a lot of knowledge work. In fact, the mobile internet is virtual realities are transforming education to where you can have non-geographic constraints and all of that. 3D printing and automated transportation. All of these things are really going to start putting pressure on our old paradigm. And I don't think that we are really prepared for this in any way. And I don't hear anyone, I don't hear the clarion call. If it's being made, I don't hear it. I've seen, articles here and there and all of that, but I think that we're missing the boat. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, to a certain degree, yes, I do. There have been in the past few years several books written on the subject, and there's very prominent thinkers and technologies and so on who basically being ringing the bell and raising the alarm that there are different aspects of those things that we need to come to terms with, we need to discuss, we need to have we need to figure out how we're going to tackle it, from ethical issues to issues of how it will affect the economy, the labor force, and I don't know if the way to characterize it is that that we're not addressing it quickly enough. It's that the change is happening so fast. I don't think there's real precedence for this rate of change that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, the concern that I have is related to, like, for instance, advances in the sociological fields have made, for instance, the fact that human beings have this colloquial notion that we think and we make decisions, and then we can choose to act on them or not, and neurophysiology and like a lot of different disciplines are sort of upturning that sort of notion to where we don't necessarily have as much control over our own lives as we once thought we did, or we assumed we did. And based on that, that should have an impact on some of our existing social systems, like maybe the criminal justice system or whatever. And we don't make that transition very rapidly. And so I think what you're pointing out, even though there are people that are making the call, I'm not sure we're hearing it in such a way that we're not going to go through some painful experience because we didn't quite prepare, we didn't listen.
Right. No, I think that's accurate. There's a lot of information that we now have that should be making us, we should be making decisions based on that. Whether it be the field of social psychology or behavioral economics or psychiatry, what have you. It always takes a long time to change the status quo, right? Traditionally has always taken a long time to change the status quo. From I don't know if the process can really be changed, right? And you just pointed out examples where of things that should have already created gotten us to a point where we should be acting on that information, and we're not doing it. I mean, we're still debating whether climate change is real or a hoax. It's a complex. I don't know if I have an answer as to why that is, and why is it that we are not able to organize better and make better decisions with information that's already at hand.
Well, my guess is that cognitive faculties is a technology, and in terms of biology, our capacity to use abstractions in order, symbols in order to manipulate things in our mind and then try it out in reality and so forth is pretty new on the evolutionary scene. It doesn't really cling to us very rapidly. As soon as you start to anger somebody, their logic and reason just sort of floats away, and they go back to the limbic system pretty quickly. Maybe that is part of the reason why we're so slow to change over time is we're just not that smart. In other words, intelligence, although it's new on the scene and we give it a lot of credibility, it is very new and perhaps has a more of a tenuous hold on steering our behaviors than we would like to think it does. So, yes.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I would tend to agree with that. I mean, we can still discuss. I mean, there are many other ramifications to this. You started talking about information, how technology would affect that particular industry, and in the theme here, there is almost I mean, technology in itself is not either a good or a bad thing, right?
I would agree with that.
Value neutral. I think you can say that technology allows us to optimize things better. Now, what we do with that capability, we can do things for the better or for the worse of humanity. Look at, for example, data mining or analyzing large data sets and trying to determine relationships and so on. Every day we record more and more information, whether it be your cell phone recording your behavior, your personal fitness device recording your vitals and so on, and analyzing traffic on websites, and this information is incredibly valuable for any industry. Whether it be designing and manufacturing products that are better suited for the task, marketing and advertising, political strategies, figuring out what the right message should be, policymakers, defining legislation and creating legislation that addresses problems more efficiently, law enforcement, agriculture, medical, pharmaceutical industry. It's an endless thing. I'm not aware of any particular industry where more information, better quality information, better analysis is not a beneficial thing.
Well, I think the charlatan industry doesn't really appreciate that very much.
Well, actually, I would actually disagree. I think it's extremely important for them to understand the psychometrics and what their audience wants, right? So even it may not be in their benefit to share that information with their target market, right?
Right.
But it will be very useful for them. So that is a wonderful thing. But there's obviously a downside to this, right? There is if we're able to, I mean, it almost goes back to philosophy, right? If we're able to determine with a great degree of accuracy what the individual wants, what it needs, what it desires, what their secrets are, and so on, right? You can also use that to manipulate them in a very, very efficient way, effective way.
Like, for instance, Facebook, I think now uses an algorithm that sort of captures how long you look at the individual items, and in other words, they're parsing the data down to not only what appears on your page and so forth, but how long you look at it and all of that. That seems to me to be a pretty powerful insight. I don't think that the average person on the street, and even even if a person is smart, that you can overcome some sort of a system that kind of analyzes and then uses that information to sway your opinion one way or the other. I don't think that any individual human is capable of standing up to that kind of onslaught. We are influenced, and so whoever decides to define the argument and has access to those powerful tools kind of has an edge on whatever they want to use to make their agenda happen.
I mean, this thing has implications even to, I mean, even we for a long time the general consensus is democratic systems are the best ways to govern a population, right? Like self-governing to a certain degree. We have options. We choose. We You know, if they do a good job, we vote for them. If they don't, we vote them out, and so on. But that assumes that we have information that is actually reliable to make those decisions, right?
Yeah, that's the point that I was going to make. It depends on an educated populace, so they can actually know what their vote means.
So you know, with the ability to manipulate people so effectively, so efficiently, you know, we have to rethink the whole idea again, right? And, you know, you were talking about earlier about, you know, the ability to make decisions, and that in fact we are not really as in control as we think we are. You know, and that all goes. I mean, there is a division here in terms of philosophy, just in the political system of this country, between one side that believes that we have a lot more free will, and another side that believes that we have a lot, you know, more limited, you know, access to free will. You know, these conversations have been going on since for a very long time. This is not a new thing, and there's been a lot of, you know, philosophical you know, work on the subject. There's still no consensus in terms of, you know, what is we can't even, we don't even have consensus in terms of what reality is. Much less if we're, you know, really, you know, free actors here, you know, able to make, you know, choices and so on. But
I remember the article of how Target figured out a teen girl was pregnant before her father did, was the title of the article, and that those sorts of things are possible in today's world.
Oh, they can determine. We can determine through analysis what your sexual preference is, even though you may not even know it,
or admit it to oneself.
Exactly. So you know, it's amazing what is coming. You know, so I think even to begin to talk about, I mean, those are things that I don't know if we can. It'll take a long time, I think, before we can figure out the place of those things and how, you know, how to actually harness that for, you know, for the better, and come up with policy, or, you know, an understanding of how to, you know, control it, if you will.
Is it fair to say that technology is really moving the fulcrum to, you know, in terms of your best guesstimate? No one here has an exact crystal ball, but technology is moving the fulcrum so that we can leverage much more powerful events with ostensibly much less effort on human scales. And like you said earlier, and I agree, it can be used for both positive and negative things. So with that in mind, we have to really take responsibility for the power that is now in our hands as humanity. I think that we need to really begin to focus on that, because the stakes get so much higher when the leverage point, you know, reaches that critical place where you can really wreck the whole. We could kill the golden goose, so to speak, that nourishes us.
Right. In fact, there is a I can't remember the name of the author, but he was talking about something called Fattails, which is in the world of probability, things that are unlikely, but if they do happen, the ramifications are enormous. You know, for example,
Malcolm Gladwell with tipping points, maybe.
Don't remember. It could be, but he's an expert on probabilities, risk management, and things like that. And he brought us an example in the I think it was a Rationally Speaking podcast I was listening to. Either that or I can't remember now. You know, but you know, you've also heard the term black swan. It was a book written about that as well, which are highly unlikely events, but when they do happen, they have great ramifications. And you know, thinking of technology as a kind of like a force multiplier, if you will, you know, we are getting to a point where one individual can do certain things that could have global implications. You know, until the atomic bomb, we really didn't have that type of capability. You know, from a technological point of view, right? I mean, we've always had that capability, and from a biological point of view, in the sense that, you know, when the conquistadors made it to Latin America, most of the natives were already dead because the disease, you know, the flu, the smallpox, and everything else traveled, well ahead of them. So you can argue that we've always had the capability where a single individual with a particular pathogen can have just, you know, incredible effect on a population, on a global population, right? But now we have it with our technology, you know. You know, until the atomic bomb, we didn't have technology that was so, you know, that had that type of power. And ever since, you know, we discovered the bomb and we used it, you know, and certain people acquired, you know, there was a race to figure out how to control it. In fact, you look at now, you know, the issues with Iran and North Korea and Pakistan and, you know, all this geopolitical issues that are going on in order to control nuclear proliferation. But I think that we will soon have capabilities of having effects comparable to that, just using software, for example. You know, if somebody is able to create artificial intelligence that is sufficiently advanced, that could cause incredible, you know, wreak havoc in our society.
A worm that could take out the electric grid or some other, you know, critical system.
Right.
Yeah, that's possible now, I would imagine. Yeah.
So if that is the case, I mean, even our concepts of individual freedom, you know, need to be revisited. You know, if we all had, if a significant portion of the population of individuals had the ability to you know, to have that type of effect, you know, should we be allowed to do those things? So we be allowed to, because one thing is to say, well, you know, we'll punish those who create something malicious and causes damage and everything else. But I think those ideas of punishment.
Yeah, you can't unring the bell. If somebody has that much destructive power, the fact that they pulled the trigger, no punishment could fit the crime, because
no punishment could fit the crime. Exactly. There are things that could happen that could not be fixed.
Yeah. I wonder, so what do you think that the existing thinkers and policymakers should focus on to begin to prepare us for this automated future?
I think there are a lot of things that we need to do. I mean, just looking at automation and you know, a labor force whose value is diminishing, right? I mean, just in the U.S. alone, about 37% of jobs. Here, actually, let me look that number because I just saw it. According to, as of 2012, about 37% of all jobs in the United States were either in the manufacturing, wholesale trade, retail trade, transportation and warehousing, and healthcare and social assistance.
And what's your source on that?
This is Department of Labor and Statistics.
Okay.
Actually, let me verify that real quick.
But your point is,
Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay.
Right.
The point is true, though, that there has been a dramatic shift in the labor force requirements.
Right. So I mean, if you're looking at technology that can significantly disrupt those industries, you know, that's 37% of jobs. You know, we had a recession. Unemployment was like 11% or something like that at its worst, and it was considered to be a tremendous economic calamity. Multiply that times 4, you know, times 5. You know, how do we deal with that? You know. So the first step, I think, is I think we have to rethink our system of education. I think the idea of, you know, going to elementary followed by middle school, high school, and then 4, you know, 2, 4, 6, 8 years of college continuously. That was great when you basically can choose a career, learn everything you needed to do, or most of the things you needed to learn around that particular career, and then spend the rest of your life practicing. I think we're entering an age where, you know, what you learn in school becomes obsolete fairly quickly, or a big portion of it. basically, I would like to see us explore the idea of trading a system where we educate kids when they're young and not later on in life, to a system of continual education.
Yes, I do agree. In fact, because that's one of the paradigms that really has changed, that I think we have allowed to sort of languish. We're still using a model of education that Socrates would have recognized, even though the technology is advanced. We have everyone that carries a cell phone these days, a smartphone, has the Oracle of Delphi, has the information of almost the entire world at their fingertips, and yet education is still trying to install facts. Well, facts are at the ready. We need people to, and from my perspective, we need people to understand how to ask good questions and be able to parse facts from fantasy, so that they can actually translate that. And we need them also to have the social skills to be able to translate those visions into reality. Certainly, if they have, like, for instance, if somebody starts asking good questions about cancer, and yet they have no means of actually verifying that in a real world, or creating some citizen science, or getting that information to the right person, then I think that the world is a poorer place because that connection was not made. And I think that education needs to produce good question askers and good fact finders and good social skill people to be able to translate those visions into reality. And that is not what it does today. It just sort of does the same old thing of kind of creating a Texas Instrument calculator person that kind of has, there are some pockets like surgical skills and all of that you have to actually learn some hands-on things. But for the most part, I think academia is a fact installer, and that is to our detriment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that there are certain, I mean, for example, I just read an article recently, I think it was Sweden wants to revamp their educational system. They want to move away from having specific subjects to almost like project-specific learning, multidisciplinary type of approach to learning. And I think that's likely to be a good step. That's probably a step in the right direction. There is there's also the idea that at some point we also will be able to leverage technology to help us with our own cognitive skills and so on, the whole transhumanism type idea. But that's probably much farther down. That's probably going to come in too late. Put it that way. I think that's probably not close enough to prevent us from going through, the pain of the massive change and so on that's coming fairly rapidly.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a couple of times here tonight that the value of the workforce is diminishing because the machines are sort of taking over the tasks that were once valued. But ultimately, I think that is predicated on a paradigm which will not survive going forward into the future. At least that's my suspicion. I don't have a fact on that, but ultimately we're going to need to make a decision about what it takes in order to just live and breathe and exist on planet Earth, because the paradigm is moving off of, we used to have to do things to, if we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a model, physiological things like breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, and all of that, safety, love, and belonging, those things, the physiological things are being met, and so now we need to concern ourselves with those higher things. And he puts, and some people argue whether this is the right model or not, but just for argument's sake, up on top of it, we have creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, like a pluralistic thing. And I think with the power of technology, one of the things that we're really going to need to emphasize is people's capacity to accept the fact that we need to shift the paradigm from what I can get is the nature of my wealth to what I can give is the nature of my wealth. In other words, we are all wealthier if we have a vested interest in each other's success. And that's one of the underpinnings, I think, that is vital to our survival going forward into the future. Otherwise, we're just going to get caught in an ideological matrix where somebody who has a technological lever that can throw some biological agent out to kill millions of people who think differently will indeed do that fact. And so I think our most important focus going into the future is social and not necessarily technological, if the two can be differentiated.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think our entire value system needs to change.
From what to what?
Right. So from valuing individuals by their ability to produce, from what they can produce. We tend to value. We look at society and we tend to say, you're successful because you're able to do this, this, and that. You're not successful, or you're worth less, or you deserve less because you don't have these capabilities. I think as human capabilities become less and less relevant in a machine world, if you will, right? In an automated artificial intelligence world, we need to shift the way we value human beings. We have to either rethink the idea of a living wage, whether you actually have employment or not. We have to think about how do we control population, and do we all get to reproduce with extensions of life? Who gets to extend their life? Do we all get to live 1,000 years? Are only those who have something of value for this society get to live 1,000 years? Or perhaps only those who can afford to pay for the extensions get to live 1,000 years? And that may or may not be the best thing for society, right? And I don't necessarily have the answers. I have certain inclinations. I would like to think that somehow we will come up to that the answer will be somewhere along the lines of, everybody has value, and, we bring things to this community in many different ways. Some of them are physical, tangible, some of them are not, perhaps simply a good companion is something, that has value in the long term, in the scope of things. But that's not the society we live in. We live in a very materialistic society, and it's not just in the U.S. It's throughout the world. You see it perhaps more in highly developed countries, where we have access to goods, where we have more. Like you like to say, the analogy of accumulating coconuts, right? We have more coconuts here, yeah. But you also see it on countries as they become more and more developed and they have more access to things. You see that shift there too. It's not unique to American culture. It apparently is. It's somehow it has more to do with the human being or the condition of the human being, right? So we are going to have to evaluate or reevaluate all these things. We are going to have to, if we're going to make it beyond this, if we're going to survive beyond our usefulness, we're going to have to rethink, how we value human beings and so on.
I would agree, and I would extend that out to the whole ecosystem, that we need to nourish that thing which feeds us, and if we don't tend to that, it will ultimately dry up. And the way that bankruptcy and bridges collapse and all of that there's tipping points that sort of get reached, and one more ounce and the bridge collapses or whatever. I would also suggest too that we have had in the past a need for tribalism, for in-group and out-group, and just in order to survive through the Ice Age and the famine and so forth. And we've had to do horrendous things and all of that in order to get through that. And I think maybe we have picked up some cultural wounds and starvation echoes or fears and so forth that we kind of do propagate in our culture. We want to store the coconuts in this silo because we're afraid that we might run out, and then that whole thing starts emerging in the culture. But ultimately, what a society depends on is not competition. Not that competition is necessarily bad, but it's like water or anything else. Too much of it and you drown. It'll actually destroy the system. Not enough and you'll die of thirst. I think all things work that way, that there is a range of appropriateness to things. And our notion of competition, I think, is exaggerated because of some of the suffering things, some self-made and some environmental, that we have endured over the years, particularly in these Western developed countries. And so with all of that in mind, I think the important thing for us would be to really recognize the value of cooperation in terms of what it really does serve us. And I think it's right in front of our face. We have a tendency to ignore it because our focus is on competition. You have to grow up, you have to compete in the marketplace, and all of those are the sort of abstract benchmarks that we get as marching orders as we grow up. And in fact, cooperation, if you and I didn't cooperate on the meaning of words, we wouldn't be able to share with each other. So, you know, there's a social contract of cooperation that really extends outward. If we stopped cooperating, the food in the grocery stores would dry up in about 3 days, and I mean, chaos would happen. And so I just think we miss that enormously present thing, perhaps because it's so mundane, but yet it is very valuable. And in fact, our economic systems in some sense are reverse order from what we really value. In other words, we would give up the yacht and on down through the house and even the clothes and the food for our last breath of air. And that's the inverse order which we actually monetarily value things. So it's sort of a mirror image of what we truly value. And I think that ultimately that is the complexity and perplexity of the human condition, is that the things that we perhaps value the least are in fact the most valuable. And I think as a culture we need to recognize that when we have a vested stake in each other's success, that's where the real wealth of experience in life, and also advancements in technology and all of that are applied well to, you know, constructive things as opposed to destructive things, comes from. It comes from that recognition that we all have value. I think that's the proposition that we ought to promote most forcefully, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The question would be, I'm getting an echo back. There we go. You know, how do we go about promoting this thing, right? How do we, you know, what are the actionable items? You know, how do we, you know, obviously, you know, there is social networks, there's all this new mediums to disseminate the message, right? But beyond that, you know, how do we go about organizing and getting the right people to get together and think about these things, you know, and figure out the solutions to move forward. I'm not sure. I mean, we've talked about this before. We talked about this the other night, you know, but whether, you know, some of the stuff can be done from a top down, whether, you know, a top down approach perhaps doesn't work that well, that it has to be a bottom up approach, and so on. You know, centralized versus decentralized organizational systems, right? You know,
do you have a thought in terms of a model that would work best, or is it just those are the options on the table?
Yeah, I mean, those are the ones that I can think of. I mean, the two big paradigms is the top to bottom versus the bottom up approach. One is centralized and the other one is decentralized.
Yeah, my thought is the decentralized model is the only one that works. For instance, if you have a vested interest in other people's stake, and you have a certain sphere of influence in your life, you need to cultivate that to the degree that you have influence. And if you're doing that a local level, if somebody from on high is telling you, you know, look, this mass of people go this way and go that way, I think that it sort of diminishes that entrepreneurial spirit of participation that we all get a charge out of, you know, getting socially, that we want to be validated, I think, in some sense, for doing something that is worthy of recognition. And so that contribution gets cut off whenever there's a centralized, not whenever, but very frequently when there's a centralized top-down hierarchy. Also, I think that we need people that are committed to do it rather than compliant. And so a top-down model has a tendency to be more authoritarian and command and control, as opposed to unlocking the doors of entrepreneurials that that enable committed behaviors to happen. So anyway, that's my suggestion, but it might be pie in the sky. I don't even know if it's practical. I'm just saying it resonates with me a little bit more.
No, and I agree. I mean, there's certainly, in fact, I just finished reading the Wisdom of the Crowds book, which is, has a lot to do with what we're talking about. I've also read a few other books on the subject of decentralized structures and so on. Like one example of a decentralized structure would be well, in a way, it's the internet itself, right? Another one will be AA, Alcoholic Anonymous, right? It's something that was put together quite some time ago and is still going strong, very efficient and so on. So James Surowiecki, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's the guy who wrote The Wisdom of the Crowd.
That's pretty close, I think.
So he he pointed out, he basically made, if I understood the book correctly, or he was trying to say, because that's that's always, but he said that there's certain benefits, advantages, disadvantages to a decentralized system, and a decentralized system works best when the action is decentralized and so on, but information is centralized. The disadvantage of a decentralized system
access to information is that what the
aggregation and access to information, right? So the problem with a decentralized system is that a lot of good ideas don't go anywhere because they're not exposed to not everyone is exposed to the right to this new great shiny idea that will work fantastic, and perhaps the people who were, or the portion of the network that was exposed to the brilliant idea didn't have the capabilities to see it to completion, right? Yeah. So he also talked about, one example was it was about PAM, something the federal government tried to do for intelligence, where they wanted to create a marketplace for intelligence gathering, where people from different walks of life and so on can contribute to questions of whether regime A was was about to go into some sort of collapse, or a particular market had an issue, or so on, right? It's basically to do crowdsourcing for intelligence gathering, and the federal government, I can't remember which senator it was, I think Leahy perhaps, really shot it down, or one of those guys went after it. How ridiculous? How can we outsource this thing, right? So in that particular sense, we don't know. We may never know whether that's going to work or not. Whether that was a good idea or not. But there have been many examples of decentralized systems that work well. Wikipedia would be one of them, right? Wikipedia in a way is a decentralized system, but it does centralize the information. Everybody has access to the same information from a single point. So people are not in the dark about particular suggestions to change an article, or an idea or criticism or so on. And the list is fairly long of decentralized systems. Craigslist, editing on Craigslist is decentralized. So decentralized systems are incredibly robust.
Do you think that part of the element for the reason that they are so robust is because people are feel like they're not being compelled to do it, that it is a committed act that actually builds those systems? Because when I think about the amount of effort that had to go in to produce a thing like Wikipedia, in terms of the quality of information that's in there, and I know some people dispute it and argue that because some of it's wrong, all of it's wrong, and there are some pockets of pretty hot dispute that they have to lock the topics up, particularly near politics or whatever. But in terms of like, for instance, if you're looking up information on stars or any number of things for which they need to have a grounding in peer-reviewed works and all of that, Wikipedia is a magnificent place to go to, and it took an enormous amount of effort to concoct, and most of those people, the lion's share of them, did it for free.
Sure.
To share with the world. And I think that is a testament to that element of humanity. And I'm not saying that humanity is full of, flowers and roses in every corner. That's obviously not true. But I do think that our passion for fulfillment is in doing something constructive and valuable. In fact, that's the nature of creativity. When you produce something that's both useful, novel and useful, you've hit the target of creativity, and that's what that thing did. Everybody rushed in to sort of help and build it up, and I think recognizing our desire to contribute something of value in the context of community is something that is woefully untapped by virtue of the command and control system, because it sort of robs the person of their of that innate desire. Our bodies are predicated on that principle, where each part has to produce something of nourishing value in the context of community. And then the most fulfilled people in the world also have that, where they're actually contributing something on a grand scale, or a larger scale than themselves. That's what fulfillment is all about, whether it's family or larger community or whatever. And I think that we need to facilitate those things in order to really take our world in a future-ward direction positively, or at least as positively as we can.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned earlier tribalism, right? And tribalism being some sort of, perhaps a evolutionary advantage that it's no longer as useful.
Or perhaps detrimental.
Or perhaps detrimental.
Look, I think we are tribal, and we just need to raise the level of who our tribe is to the entire world. We need to recognize that we all swim in the same pond. I don't think we can eliminate, we don't have to shoot down tribalism like it's a pejorative, but we need to recognize how to utilize that innate trait that we have so that it is constructive rather than destructive.
I was just going to point out that, even when it comes, every time you mention the word community, it is in fact our tribal instinct that allows us and compels us to participate in a given community. That community becomes our tribe. There is such a thing as the tribe of editors in Wikipedia, or editors in Wikipedia of a particular subject and so on, right? So that sense of tribalism, of identity, and so on, it's you can say that, and I think in many ways it's detrimental, because it may be the source of lots of behavior that is that is basically bad for society.
Yeah, I do think that it could be carried to, when we use ideology as the marker for who is worthy of life and who is not, then we've crossed a line. In other words, a kidney is not a heart. They are different in many respects, but they're part of the same system. And so I think when we diminish each other as human beings, or even those parts of the larger body of life that are part of the chain that feeds us. For instance, if we killed all the plants, nothing would produce the oxygen that we need to breathe.
Right.
And so ultimately we have to tend the whole garden of life. And I think we need to recognize and tool ourselves to see Earth as tribe, and not, the microcosms of tribe as a mechanism to, squash out the other. In other words, I think that when humanity attacks itself for superficial ideologies, and I'm not talking about behaviors. If somebody's swinging an axe, that's a different story. You got to contain that. But if somebody has a superficial ideology and you dehumanize them for that, to me, that is synonymous with an autoimmune disease inside the context of a body, that you're attacking yourself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. At the end of the day, I think we have the tools that are necessary to make this transition. Is figuring out how to use them properly, right? When it comes to technology and all of the potential for good and the potential for bad and so on, technology, or the accumulation of knowledge and applied knowledge and so on, although it's not a bulletproof thing, it is fragile. We have had points in our history, civilization has made steps forward and has also taken step backs. But we've overcome that and continue to move forward. So I would argue that technology, it's not only a worthwhile pursuit, as you pointed out in your notes, it's a necessary pursuit. In other words, I think if we want to perpetuate, if we want this species to survive in some form or another, or if we want, perhaps even we have to change the way we think about us in terms of a species, right? If you want human knowledge to survive, our condition, our place in the universe, and so on, technology is the only way to get there. And whether that means that in a very long time or sometime in the future, Homo sapien itself is not here anymore, and somehow our knowledge carries on in some sort of artificial form, as the ultimate thing, and that's how we escape our solar system and move on elsewhere in the universe or what have you. Technology is a freight train that is unstoppable. And it's more about how do we retool, how do we adjust our perspective, how do we adjust our value system and so on to make that transition a as painless as possible, but the idea that somehow we are going to be able to do away with this because we see too many potential negative side effects of this, I don't think that's a realistic thing. I think we're moving forward. I think it's only one direction, is forward. We just got to make sure that we come up with a system that's equitable enough and so on, that like you're talking about, nourishing streams and relationships, and that we can actually do it together, or as intact as possible, right?
Yeah, we may go. Birth is a painful and bloody process, but it's also a wonderful one. So I do think that we are on the threshold of the former womb that contained us is no longer going to be able to nourish us. So we do have to break out of it. And so my guess is that there's going to be some pain in that process. But I also think that we can do our best to prepare so that we don't end up with some kind of a stillborn situation and or a dead mother. You're right, technology is an unstoppable train. I also know that like the phrase that you use that I really like is at the end of the day, the fact is we have been able to adapt to our environment and our forebears have, for as long as life has been around. We're some extension of the original seeds as far as we know. And in order to continue that, we do have to face and deal appropriately with change. And so this is one of them that is coming down the pike, and I think we would do well to really focus on how to do that change effectively. So I think we've had a good start on the conversation tonight. What's your read?
I think so. It's been very, very stimulating, to say the least. Yes. Agreed.
So, well, I think we've covered kind of the bases that we wanted to cover, and if we talk more, it's probably just going to get cloudy. So why don't we close it up here? And I want to thank everybody for watching, listening. The links we spoke about during the exchange here, Benny and I, will be down below in the units. We'd love to have you give some feedback and ideas and spark more conversations. I'd like to have more of these going into the future, more things like this. I think it was really productive, and I do want to thank you, Benny, for bringing your head and your heart and your intellect to the table. It was really nice to have you.
Well, great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, we're going off. Thank you. See you. Bye.